Hi, um, my name is Kavita. I'm a full stack developer, although I work mainly on the back end side of things in Elixir and Ruby. So today I want to talk about dependencies. And to define dependencies, dependencies are anything your application relies on. So for example, if you have used like a Ruby gem or a Node package, you've used a dependency before. So I'd name this talk Dependencies Are Like Puppies, and I know that sounds like a weird analogy, but I promise I'll come back to it in the end. So for now, I'm going to start off with sharing two stories. So the first happened in 2016, when Node, React, and Babel, and a bunch of other high-profile JavaScript packages on NPM, the JavaScript package manager, broke. This in turn caused thousands of builds and projects around the world to break. So it turns out a developer had unpublished more than 250 of his modules from NPM over a brand dispute with the lawyers of the somewhat popular instant messaging app called Kik. So when NPM gave in and took away Kik, the developer got pissed off and unpublished all of his NPM managed modules. So unfortunately, one of these modules happened to be leftpad, which pads out the left-hand side of strings with zeros or spaces. So this sounds pretty basic, except thousands of packages, including Node and Babel, relied on leftpad. And when leftpad got removed from NPM, these applications crashed in deployment. So the craziest thing about all of this is that leftpad, which took down like a whole lot of software the internet runs on, consists of 11 lines in JavaScript. It's pretty crazy. So the second story is about a Ruby gem called MIME types. So in 2015, the maintainers of the MIME types decided, like, hey, we want to optimize the memory usage of our gem, which is like a great idea in itself. So the crazy thing was the implementation of this optimization saved up to 10 megabytes of RAM for literally every Rails app in existence. So the part where it gets a bit weird is that even if you were a Rails developer, you probably hadn't heard about MIME types. And that was because this gem wasn't being used directly by your app, Rails, or Action Mailer. MIME types is being used deep in the implementation of Action Mailer and using way too much memory. So because of this obscure gem, which is buried deep in every Rails app, every single Rails project was using 10 megabytes too much. And most people didn't even know. So, as you can see from these stories, the truth of the matter is there are thousands of applications that exist out there which are dependencies on top of dependencies on top of dependencies, to the point where people don't even know how many hundreds or thousands of third-party applications your project actually relies on. So this is what you think your project looks like, but that is what it looks like, because that only includes the direct dependencies you actually know about. So for example, if your project relies on about 10 dependencies, those 10 dependencies might rely on another 100, which rely on another 500, and before you know it, this is what your dependency graph for your project looks like. This is a dependency visualization for a Rails project, by the way. Yeah, so I thought it would be a fun slash slightly scary experiment to see how many dependencies some popular frameworks have. So if you've used React before, you might have used, I don't know, how many of you have used create React app? Show of hands. Yeah, cool. So today at work, I initialized a create React app called testing dep, very creatively named. And just initializing this project installs 974 different packages in your project. So even before you have written a single line of your own code, your project now relies on these 974 packages working correctly. And if you start digging deeper into these pile of code you have just dumped into your database, code base, things get more interesting. So there is a package called isArray that has more than 1 million downloads per day and close to 12 million downloads last week, and has 262 dependent packages on it. And it's one line of code. That's it. That's about it. And then we have centralign, which is used to align the text in a string to the center. Again, loads of downloads per day, per week, 30 packages dependent on it. And that's all it does. So which kind of I'll get back to that. Which kind of brings us to the question, do we really need external dependencies for functionality which we can implement by ourselves? And how much do we actually know about all the dependencies we bring? So, Harry Potter. So exercising no control over your dependency tree is the first problem. The second problem is how people treat dependencies. A lot of the time, and I've seen this for myself, dependencies get treated like magic. So people take in dependencies without even thinking about it and just expect it to work forever. And that is really bad. First, accepting something as magic is dangerous because if you don't try to understand how something works in the program you're writing, you're not going to end up with a robust application. Second, dependencies aren't immortal. They are typically open source projects run by maintainers in their free time. So they can get unpublished, they can get deprecated, maintainers might stop maintaining their project because they don't have time for it anymore. And most importantly, there is like zero guarantee that what someone else has written is correct or even works well. So that brings us to the question, how should you treat your dependencies? And like, don't get me wrong, this talk isn't about how you should like never ever use a dependency again. As developers, we need dependencies so that we're not reinventing the wheel and the ability to use proven, well-tested libraries and tools that somebody has already authored for us. So they can have a lot of value when you use them right. At the same time, we need to be aware of the trade-offs we're making with each and every dependency we import. The more dependencies you take on, the more points of failure you have. This means every dependency in your application has the potential to destabilize your app or to inject odd behavior. There is even a name for this. It's called dependency hell. So, which Technopedia defines as what occurs when software works abnormally or displays errors and bugs due to an integrated software application developed by a third party. So when you take on a dependency, you are taking on everything about it, the good and the bad. You need to care for it along with the rest of your project, rather than blindly expecting it to take care of itself. So this tweet by Dave Chaney kind of sums it up. So you don't download or import a software dependency, you adopt it. So like an adopting pets is responsibility for the rest of your life. Responsibility for the life of your product. I can't read. So that kind of brings us back to the initial premise of our talk. So dependencies are like puppies, because they can be super cute, awesome additions to your project, just like a puppy, but they're not going to feed themselves or clean up their own shit. So that's all on you. So what's the right thing to do? First, ask if you need a dependency for whatever you're trying to do. Can you implement the functionality by yourself, or will the time and money that will take outweigh any potential risks? Second, vet your dependencies. Be really picky when choosing new dependencies for your code. Make sure it's in good health. Make sure it's being maintained on a regular basis. Third, have a way of tracking the dependencies for your software. So in my team, all our projects have like a simple, up-to-date list of all the software packages and like the required versions to use this on like a markdown in our repo. And it's always one person's responsibility to update all these dependencies each sprint, check for any deprecations, and make sure any new dependencies we have adopted are included in this list. Lastly, if you discover something wrong with a dependency or package you're using and have created a local patch for it, try to push it upstream. Send a pull request with a patch or get in touch with the maintainers. Share the knowledge that you have gained so the rest of the community can benefit. So, I want to end with these software engineering rules, which I wasn't aware of when I first started programming, and I think there's a lot of value to knowing it, which is no code runs faster than no code. No code has fewer bugs than no code. And it kind of like follows along the same trend of things. But the idea is generally just having more code in your application doesn't make your application better. So, thank you.